Welcome to the Strategic Digital Transformation webinar organized by the Strategic Management and Leadership Research Cluster of the Open University Business School. We are delighted to have with us three distinguished panelists, which in the next hour will explore current thinking and practice on strategic digital transformation in both academic and practitioner context. Embracing digital technologies has been a key strategic priority for organizations of different sizes and across sectors. The present moment has seen an increased urgency for organizations to enhance their digital presence, to redefine their strategies, and take advantage of the opportunities that digital transformation can offer. Our panelists will offer unique insights on the move to digital in both business and higher education context. With us are Dr. Giacomo Mccarley, Teaching Director for Undergraduate Programs at the Open University Business School, Jane Roberts, Acting Head of Openlearn, the Open University's home for free learning, and Kate Payne, Associate Director for Digital Strategy and Capabilities of Astellas Pharma. May I welcome you to post your questions in the box throughout the webinar. We'll discuss your questions before we close. If we can move on to the next slide, please. I have the great pleasure to introduce our first panelist, Dr. Giacomo Mccarley. Giacomo is a teaching director of the undergraduate programs at the Business School and a member of the Strategic Management and Leadership Research Cluster. Giacomo studied in Italy at the University of Bologna, and before joining the Open University, he taught at the University of Bocconi and was a management consultant on organizational change. Giacomo, with a fellowship from the Higher Education Academy, has a keen interest in higher education's strategy and teaching innovation. Giacomo, over to you.
Hi, everyone. And thank you, Despina, for the introduction. I will move to the next slide. So when we talk about strategic digital transformation, we cannot do that without understanding what business model in the digital age are. So in this slide, which is based on the innovative teaching content that we put in two new modules in strategy, the one we teach at the undergraduate and the one we teach at the master level in the MBA, we show basically four different types of business models. All of them can be used in the digital space. The yellow ones on the left represent a more traditional transaction between a firm and a customer. In the first one, basically, there is a customer that buys a standardized product that is offered on the shelves, basically. In the second one, on the bottom left, of the screen, you see basically a tailored product. So the customer shares his needs beforehand, and the firm designs the product according to the needs. Whereas on the right, we see more sophisticated business models, which make use of platforms in two different ways. First one is typically an exchange platform, which can be physical, like a stock exchange, not the digital one that we have now, but the one where you see all the brokers shouting in a large room, or a digital one like eBay. So basically, the platform conveys the relationship between a seller and a customer. In the bottom right, instead, we see what is called by Baden-Fuller the multi-sided business model. This is the product of a recent research that is still unpublished by Baden-Fuller, and I wanted to share with you these insights to give you a view of what is coming in terms of strategic research on digital business model. So in a multi-sided business model, the interaction between different types of customers is all led by the platform. And here we think more about Uber, for instance, where we book a taxi through the platform and we don't pay directly our driver. That is done through the platform. Sometimes we got even a free ride from Uber. So who is paying the driver? Is the platform. So all the relationship is done centrally, but the work is carried out outside the central level. So it's interesting to see where we scale up this kind of business model, that we reduce the quantity of work at the center. Because the question here is, how do we do the digital transformation? And in many cases, the digital transformation is a matter of scaling up our business. Why is that? Because we want to grow our business using the digital technologies. So we don't do that without thinking about which kind of factors influence the growth. And let's move to the next slide. So here we see on the left the evolution of a shop, a local shop, into something digital. So it decided to open its digital outlet, and then it decided to expand, creating a network of shops. Do you think this is a linear process, or is something that is, as we call it in literature, punctuated? So it doesn't come in a linear direction. It's done with quantum leaps, basically, which change radically the organization which is doing that. So what do we mean in these terms? We mean that when you engage in a digital transformation strategy, the organization is involved in a punctuated series of changes that is not linear. So we cannot plan for a linear growth. This is the first message. The second message is that in literature, many factors related to the growth, so the scalability, have been studied, like economies of scale, network externalities. So for instance, if we all use a cellular phone, of course, the value of having a cellular phone increases because we know that we can reach everyone. So that is typical for many applications. So WhatsApp is used because everyone has WhatsApp, but in other areas of the world, WhatsApp is not so popular. We have WeChat or other types of applications. So we see that many aspects have been studied, but what we lack is which kind of strategic guidance we give to firms like the one where you work for, or the organization where you work for, to scale up. There are less contribution in literature about that. And one of them is from Jim Zhang. So basically, she says that scalability is influenced by basically three strategies. The first is mixing in the same package paying and non-paying customers. So a customer can easily become a paying customer or return to be non-paying. They are not distinguished so much into in the way we treat them. So it's possible always to see what a paying customer will get more. The second one is the use of platforms which promote a network governance. What does it mean? That the control of the relationship is also done not centrally, but also located outside the central. This gives the possibility to scale up the business model without doing a lot of central investments, which are not so functional to the growth, because they create an incredible amount of fixed costs at the center. So when you scale up, you need to consider which kind of control I give it to the borders of my little empire. I don't want to concentrate everything in my hands. And this is something interesting because, I mean, many organizational theorists, especially the early ones, said, oh no, it's better to retain control on the transaction. So here we don't want to retain control on all the transaction. We want to give a system of feedback, for instance, between the customers. So we do not know exactly if they are serious customers or serious sellers or not. There is a system of feedback which is done outside. This is an example. the final one is try to create product configurations which are customizable, but in a certain way. So you cannot have a tailored suit, but you also don't have the one that you buy at Primark. Is something that you can combine in a set of definite options. So when you go for a service or a product and you want to scale up, offering a wider set of solutions is a good thing, but do not offer a tailored solution because that will require a lot of investment. Instead, configuration works much better. This is the result of a recent work of these authors. And why does it inform our digital transformation? Because it tells us a story of how we can become. And this is relevant in this time when we face the COVID-19 crisis. So if we switch to the next slide, we see that basically we have some important trends. While many organizations are turning toward a digital world that in many cases they haven't faced before so much because they were doing also normal processes, traditional type of processes, there is a strong acceleration. So a strong pressure on the transformation in terms of technology and the employment of new solutions. What drives this transformation? And you will say the need of staying in business, for sure. But the choices, so do we do this or do we do that? What drives that transformation? And in many cases, we go by imitation, we go by word of mouth, we ask consultants or whatever else. Here, I share my insights. So, well, in the slides before, I let the strategic management leader talk. Here, I share my insights from my experience. So the vision and the mission in many cases of an organization help us to define where we want to go. So they shed the light in the darkness, especially where we do not have solid reference points, understanding who we are and where do we want to go. So the vision of the company and how we go there, the mission of the company or of our organization in general, help us to design a better strategy also from a digital point of view. And to conclude, this help to define our positioning. So the positioning can be defined only after that. And the positioning cannot be done without thinking at the technology. So if we think about the technology now, and in the past, the decision about technology from a strategic point of view were done right after the positioning. First, you decide your strategic positioning, and then you decide the technology. No, now you design them together because technology becomes center stage in the positioning of any organization. Finally, a message. What does it mean to define the technology? It doesn't mean that you need to buy this information system or this different information system. We probably have seen many presentations in our organization, as we do here at the Open University, about the replacement of our systems. That is not totally a strategic decision. The strategic decision is in the design of our interaction with those systems. So how do we use those systems to succeed? So how can we design what is called by Paul Leonardi the affordances? The affordances are our use of the technology. And the question I would like to raise for you is, can we design them from a strategic point of view to succeed? And this is basically my insights on this, very short insights on this topic about strategic digital transformation.
Thank you, Giacomo, for this very insightful presentation, and also linking it to current times and the challenges that firms face in in dealing with COVID-19 pandemic. If we could move, please, to the next slide to introduce our next panelist. I have the great pleasure to introduce Jane Roberts, who is the acting head of Open University's Openlearn, which is the home of free learning at the Open University since 2006. Jane looks after a team of 20 people, which are responsible for the production of content on Openlearn. And that content has attracted interest from over 80 million visitors worldwide to date. This is equivalent of the size of Germany. With experience at the BBC, Jane is passionate about free learning and offering opportunities for lifelong learning to all. Jane, it's a pleasure to have you.
Hello, thank you so much for that introduction.
If we can start with asking some questions, going back to the Openlearn annual report that was just submitted, I would like to start our discussion by noting the following. You said in that report, I don't think I can start this year's report without mentioning the impact of COVID-19 and the impact it has had on all of us. None of us could have foreseen at the beginning of the year such a dramatic change to all our personal and working lives. Could you please tell us how COVID has affected Openlearn during the lockdown?
Yes, sure. I was thinking it might be helpful just for those that are not really familiar with Openlearn, just to give you a quick overview. So, as you mentioned in the intro, Openlearn is the Open University's home of free learning. It's a separate platform which has around 15,000 hours of free content, and that's free courses, interactives, videos, articles, most of which is derived from the OU's formal modules and written by our academic experts. The content's published on a Creative Commons license, which allows other non-profit education organisations to repurpose it and reuse the content. We've jumped up a bit more since I gave that data, so we're now just over 83 million unique visitors to the platform since we started. And just to give you a quick snapshot of our typical visitors, 18% declare that they have a disability, 53% have no higher education qualification, 28% do not speak English as a first language. And in terms of their location, the majority of our visitors are from the UK, around 53%, with the next most popular locations being the USA, India, Australia, and the Philippines. As you mentioned there, the COVID situation at the point of lockdown really did impact on us quite significantly. We really weren't expecting what we were faced with. Typically, on a weekday, we would expect around 40,000 unique visitors come to the platform each day, and almost overnight, I think it was actually probably closer to 48 hours gradual climb up, we found ourselves with 208,000 visitors just in one 24-hour period. That caused us some significant challenges, as you can imagine, and so that audience stayed. So we ended up with around, I think for April, that was the peak, with around 2.5 million unique visitors.
That's very, very impressive, and a huge number, a huge increase in number. So what kind of challenges did this huge rise in visitors place on the platform itself, and how did you respond?
Yeah, so challenges, there were lots actually, not least because the server space to kind of cope with the demand of those people visiting the sites, they were all wanting to kind of enroll on courses, that was the side that took the biggest hit for us, and basically we didn't have enough capacity to cope with them. So we ended up having a lot of support from IT, and it took them by surprise as well. And, obviously they're dealing with our paid for students and all the staffing requirements. So we did feel a little bit guilty that we were taking a lot of their time, but it was really important. There were a lot of people came to us quite quickly because they were in need, and so we needed to be able to support them. The site was incredibly slow, and one of the big issues for us was around account creation. So in terms of how things were running, IT were making lots of small incremental changes, improvements to how things were working, adding extra servers. In fact, by the time they finished, we've ended up with more than twice the capacity of servers that we originally had. But one of the big things for us, and we're a big distance learning organisation, and we're well set up for online learning. But even those numbers kind of threw us, and the big thing for us was around account creation. We have account creation systems which deal with hundreds of thousands of people normally in terms of our student cohort, but to have so many in such a small amount of time really did put our systems under a huge amount of pressure. I mean, we are actually this year having some big improvements to our infrastructure, and my goodness, did this show that it was needed.
Yeah, thank you, Jane. This is kind of like a great experience that you're sharing. I just wanted to ask you whether you've been able to leverage the Openlearn platform during the pandemic for other purposes.
We've found it's been incredibly helpful to a lot of people. These people are coming because well, there are lots of reasons why they're coming. I guess a lot of people have been furloughed and maybe lost their jobs, or maybe they've just been told to go home and they've got a lot more time on their hands. But for us, one of the big things that we were able to do to support other organisations was to help them pivot to take their teaching online. We already had a badged course called Taking Your Teaching Online, and with our academic colleagues we curated a whole bunch of content onto one single page that we could promote to people to help them put their teaching online where they previously hadn't been in that position. So that was one of our most popular content hubs over the lockdown, and continues to be very popular. We also found that we were helping a lot of other people. There were a lot of people coming to the site because they suddenly found themselves having to homeschool their children. There are lots of older children who had their GCSEs and their A-levels kind of whipped from under them. And so we found that although the platform's open to 13 plus, actually our audience typically would be quite a bit older, but we found that we were getting a lot of younger learners coming to the platform. So we responded, working with academic services, we responded by very quickly pulling together a curation of content that might be of appeal to A-level students. And in fact, since then, we've worked much more kind of strategically with some of the faculties to curate learning hubs aimed at sort of GCSE and A-level age students. So we're recognizing that that age range, there's a gap, and actually with the number of people that are choosing not actually to go off to university, but I know that the OU has had an increase in that cohort officially joining the OU for their degree qualifications. And then, that's just two of the things. We also managed to create very quickly a mental health and wellbeing resources hub, a collection of content aimed at nurses returning to practice in response to the COVID crisis, and also similar for social work and social care. And basically lots of stuff that we're doing a project at the moment working with the Department for Work and Pensions and Job Centre Plus to help support people that are losing their jobs. And the other big thing that we've been doing over the kind of spring and summer is working with the various nations, governments, skills toolkit websites. So we've got we are part of the England skills toolkit, but also similar projects for Ireland, Wales and Scotland.
This is really impressive, and thank you, Jane, for sharing these fantastic insights with us. I'd like to move to our next panelist, please. Kate Payne. I have the great pleasure to introduce Kate Payne to the discussion today. Kate is the Associate Director of Digital Strategy and Capabilities at Astellas Pharma, a Japanese multinational pharmaceutical company. Kate has an impressive experience within the pharmaceutical sector and currently works within the established markets region of Europe, Canada, and Australia. Kate has previously worked as a journalist for the BBC, The Independent, and The Times, and after graduating from universities of Sussex and North Carolina in the USA, she got an MBA with distinction from the Open University. Kate embraces digital as a disruptor and is passionate in supporting both healthcare professionals and patients in embracing digital solutions in the sector. Kate, it's very nice to have you with us.
Delighted to be here.
May I start our discussion by asking you, to what extent has the COVID-19 pandemic resulted in an increase in digital transformation in your company?
Yes, it's impacted it in two ways. If we look first internally, for the most part, the digital tools were already in place, and it was simply a matter of increasing usage and adjusting the way that employees manage their time. We all had the hardware required, so we had company laptops and smartphones, and were for the most part used to hotspotting with occasional home working. So when the decision was made in March ahead of the government announcement to work from home, the concentration of that home working simply needed to be increased. Of course, just because we had the tech in place, this didn't always mean that it was seamless, and culturally, working from home has had its challenges. Astellas, however, has been really supportive in helping each employee set up a home office, and focus has been on productivity, less the hours worked, to assist colleagues who may have been juggling other commitments such as homeschooling. And I would say this has been fairly representative of pharma across the board. Secondly, in terms of how COVID has impacted the way we've liaised with our customers, and in our case, that's healthcare professionals, the change has been more profound. Pharma is quite a traditional industry. In fact, according to McKinsey, pharma lags all other major industries except for the public sector in terms of its digital maturity. As such, pre-COVID, there was still a heavy focus on a field force that met their customers face to face. And during COVID, so from March onwards, in-person meetings just weren't possible across the globe for several months and continue to remain an issue today. So COVID really exposed a vulnerability that we needed to address. Within Astellas, we needed to stand up secure virtual meeting platforms across all the markets at speed. And in parallel, our sales representatives and our customers needed to familiarise themselves with this technology. So the transformation hasn't just been about reallocating resources, but also developing capabilities. In addition to the virtual meeting platform, we've expanded virtual conferencing offerings, our website presence and associated digital campaigns. This was really to enable customers to self-serve information at times convenient to them. So on reflection, what I would say is I think COVID and the efforts required to respond to it took us all by surprise, as the speakers before have also said. But I wouldn't say that it necessarily changed Astellas's strategic direction. Rather, the pandemic forced us to accelerate activities that we already had in plan. And so digital moved from being this highly valued tactic, if you like, to a centre stage strategy in a matter of weeks.
Great, thank you, Kate. I would like to ask you, what were the main challenges you faced when transitioning to a more extensive use of digital and the transitioning to a digital business model?
I think the main issue for us, and probably most pharma companies, was the need to be agile. So back in March, when COVID was a rapidly evolving situation which required a timely response, this was really challenging within pharma because we're bound by a number of regulations and codes of practice, which mean the technology that we were standing up and the content housed within it requires a rigorous review and approval process. Now, the areas that I was looking after at that time involved more than 42 countries, and the regulatory parameters can be different in each. That said, within weeks, all of our reps and medical colleagues were equipped with tools to make virtual calls with their customers, and in some cases, the quality of these calls have exceeded face-to-face interactions, but it required a huge amount of focus, naturally long hours, teams really pulling together in order to achieve that. The second challenge, I would say, would be managing the uncertainty. And this is again being touched on by the previous speakers, but I think it's very important. Back in March, we didn't know how long the restrictions would be in place. And while this continues to be the case today, I feel that now with 6 months on, we can start to focus on optimising our launch efforts back in March and April, and also planning for the midterm, rather than this firefighting behaviour that we saw at the start of COVID.
Yeah, I totally appreciate that. Thank you, Kate. Our final question, what do you consider to be the emerging trends in digital transformation within the healthcare sector, and how do you plan to respond?
Yeah, I think within our industry, we have to look at this from the outside in. So we first have to look at what's the transformation required for patients. Then obviously that then filters down to the healthcare professional, which is where we can try and step in and assist. So I think there are two key trends. And I think the first is we need to accept that virtual interactions are here to stay. So if we look at this from the patient perspective, multiple industry surveys have reported by and large, highly positive experiences from patients using video calls, using digital monitoring tools and so on, with most expressing a want to continue this usage post-pandemic. In fact, according to an Accenture study, 90% of patients that they surveyed across the European market said that virtual appointments have actually offered a more personalised, efficient and convenient experience for them. So then conversely, in terms of pharma interactions with healthcare professionals, pre-COVID, we saw a complete switch around. So pre-COVID, there was 64% of meetings with pharma sales reps held in person. During COVID, this flipped completely with 65% of meetings being virtual. Post-COVID, the vast majority of HCPs, so this is quoted at 87%, want either an all virtual or a hybrid meeting experience after the pandemic ends, and only 10% are considering going back to the pre-COVID norms of in-person meetings. So our response to that has to be that we have to optimise our virtual offering and move away from a one-size-fits-all approach. Content has to be more personalised, and there should be a focus on real-world data, disease area information and relevant scientific data versus more general pharma product messaging. We're seeing an increased use, again, if we look at the digital component of augmented reality across the sector. And for those who aren't familiar with augmented reality, it's different to virtual reality where everything's digitalized, and rather you use digital data to overlay real life situation. And where it can be really effective is it can help to improve understanding of complex pharma treatments, medications, as well as providing brand differentiation. I would say the second trend is that we're seeing an increased focus on treating patients at home. And according to studies, we're seeing around 65% of HCPs today valuing self-administration methods and remote monitoring of patients more than they did pre-COVID. And 20% of that group, so 1 in 5 of those HCPs, healthcare professionals, expect patient self-administration to continue after the pandemic. So again, how can pharma, as one of the enablers, support our local health economies with this? I feel strongly that pharma needs to continue offering services beyond the pill, to extend practical support, to deliver care as close to the patient as possible. And this could include the provision of remote monitoring tools and self-administration devices, such as auto-injectors or on-body devices or digital wearables, you may be more familiar with that term, and apps to help manage those patient conditions. So that's one response. I think the second is pharma needs to build relationships with digital health innovators and entrepreneurs to deliver solutions that support these local health economies and their treatment of patients in this rapidly changing environment. We need to co-create solutions with our customers and our consumers, and the consumer being the patient, thereby thinking from the outside in. And then this will also, one hopes, help to keep that much needed one step ahead, so that we don't get caught out by instances such as COVID, which have exposed these vulnerabilities.
Thank you very much, Kate. I'd like to take some questions from from the audience now, please, and I'd like to go back to our first panelist and have a question for Giacomo. So Giacomo, a question from the audience was, has the impact of COVID started to influence the strategy field? And what new research ideas are starting to develop?
So I monitored a little bit recent publications on journals. First, our first request from our students was, can you tell us more about how to deal with such crisis? And when we look at the literature about dealing with crisis, there are not so many instances of research which is focused on huge systemic crisis that affects a wide system. And some of them were based on research on strikes, or one of the most common situation was about the terrorist attack in the United States. So this kind of situations. But in general, we are looking now at basically not just how to survive the crisis, because on there are contributions which are based on, from the one side, resiliency, and from the other side, adaptation. So the resiliency is a disconnection from the environment. So I decide that I cut my relationship with the external environment. Is like when basically we close the door, we close the window, and we protect ourselves from a storm. Our resources are enough for us to survive. It's like if there is an attack in a castle from the Middle Age, basically. The other approach is much more dynamic. So is I get out and I change. And we talk about the different kind of approaches, and they have been named in different ways. They are all they fall all in the area of adaptation, so strategic agility, this kind of approaches. What the question is that is still unsolved is how do we make sense of the new normal? So the new normal is what will come after the crisis. So will we see the same type of competitions that we have seen before? Which kind of integration we will have between the different way we work, the use of technology that we are learning to use now, and our return to office, our old way of working? How will they integrate, and which will be our needs from a strategic point of view to be solved?
Thank you, Giacomo. I'd like to move on to our next panelist, Jane, and there have been two questions specifically addressed to Jane. So the first one is a question which ask, are there any specific efforts to make content more relevant for non-UK based users of Openlearn?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, it's not quite as simple as kind of us deciding what we're going to put on, and I think the key thing for us is that everything that we produce on Openlearn is produced in association with our academic colleagues, and it very much fits in with our faculty priorities and wider university priorities. So basically we don't produce stuff unless either the wider OU or specific faculties require it. A lot of what we produce is related specifically to our Openlearn modules. So we have, for every one of our Open University modules. So for every formal module, we have a small taster course available on Openlearn. Now, obviously, there will be people that never are going to be in a position to take up formal education and don't want to. Some people are there for the pure pleasure of learning, but in the main, Openlearn is there as a kind of taste for formal OU education, and so what's on there reflects what's available for the OU. And in fact, our audience also probably reflects to some degree the Open University's student base as well, although I understand actually the OU's student base is more significantly UK based.
Thank you, Jane. And if I may ask you one more question, I found it really interesting that you actively worked with other organizations, which can be potential future competitors, to get their teaching online. Do you plan to expand these partnerships, and do you see any risks in doing so?
That's very interesting, isn't it? The content that we have made available very much falls into the OU's social mission. It's the OU's mission to be open to people, places, methods and ideas, and I guess to some degree there may be a risk there. The OU's been doing this for 50 years now, and I don't think it's a quick turnaround, and I don't think we're providing all the answers with the free content that we're making available, but I think it was the right thing to do at that particular time. We have content available permanently on the site that helps people to take their teaching online, not necessarily competitors, and I'm not convinced entirely that it would be competitors that were coming to our content. I suspect more likely will be smaller organizations like schools trying to understand how to teach their own students online rather than in the classroom. In terms of a kind of more strategic perspective on that, then I think that's probably a question that I could take forward to one of my academic colleagues that works in this field, and I'd be very happy to kind of take any follow-up questions outside of this session.
Thank you, Jane. We have one question from the audience for Kate. So Kate, you said that your organization was focused on productivity rather than hours worked when home working. I suspect not organizations are so supportive. How important has been the culture of the organization in supporting the move to digital?
Massively important. I'm one of these people who believes that a company really is its people, and therefore you choose a company based on the people within it. I think Astellas, and I think pharma probably generally, the health sector maybe as a whole, is very good at looking after its employees. Astellas didn't only, and what I mean for those that may benefit from a bit more clarity regarding that comment, focusing on productivity, less hours worked, is there was a real appreciation that people may have children. It was around the time when the schools were shut, the people may be homeschooling particularly primary school age children. And we, the company as a whole recognised how important the individual was and how that would obviously impact their quality of work. And so you would get people splitting hours across the day in order to fit in with their homeschooling. But beyond that, Stellus also, the internal comms team put together this fantastic program of webinars to help people manage the uncertainty. So real, wellness sessions. I think it's, it's become to be known as this whole industry. So they weren't just, it wasn't always about how do we get through this from a work perspective. There was this real belief that we don't just survive this, we do our very best to thrive within it, and we're really going to try and enrich our colleagues as best we can by virtual means. And so we had things like, we had yoga teachers who were giving us wellness sessions, or I think psychologists also assisting in terms of how we mentally manage a situation. It's a tragedy, really. The whole situation is naturally it's a desperate situation for many people, and why obviously we're talking about it from an opportunistic perspective, from a digital viewpoint. Naturally, there are so many parts to the coronavirus that have been very impactful in a negative way. So yes, I think it is very important, and I think seeing a company rise up like that, when frankly there must have been people running around just trying to keep business going as normal, let alone offering additional support. It was incredibly impressive, and I suspect actually reflective of a lot of pharma companies across the board. They do have very good and put a lot of value on their people and enriching their workforce. So we're very fortunate, and I completely take your point. I don't think other companies are necessarily like that, perhaps because they're not as large, perhaps because they don't have the digital infrastructure to enable it. But we were very privileged in that situation, as far as that goes.
Thank you very much, Kate. I'd like to raise a question to all panelists now. And what do you think the long-term impact of COVID will be in your sector? So we start with Giacomo or Jane. You're both in the higher education sector, so from different perspectives. Jane, would you like to go first?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think this is going away in a hurry, and I think it's probably raised a lot of questions that maybe hadn't been raised before. I'm sure for the rest of the HE sector is not already online. There's been a lot of scrabbling around to try and deal with things in a very kind of coupled together way. So I think, this online way of learning is going to be here to stay. It's going to be interesting from the Open University's perspective, but I think even from my own personal perspective, my daughter, she wasn't due to go to uni this year. She was going to have a gap year. But obviously with the restrictions, she's just made a decision actually to enroll with the OU. So she's chosen to do her degree with the OU. Obviously, I say good things about the OU, so she hears the message quite strongly from me. But it's given her an opportunity to start her degree earlier. She hasn't got the worries of going off onto a campus, and I feel that it kind of gives opportunities that maybe some people are a little bit worried about going off at the moment, and it just gives an alternative. So I think this year is a bit of a test case, and I think, we don't know what's going to happen in the next 6 months. We're certainly not expecting to be back in the office for at least 6 months, and we don't know beyond that. So I think it can only have a long-term impact, really. It's not going away quickly.
Thank you, Jane. Giacomo, may I ask you the same question, please? What do you think the long-term impact of COVID will be in your sector?
So, in general, for universities, it means a lot of rethinking of the way they teach, the way they create value for students. Can an offline teaching like the one we do at the Open University, so asynchronous teaching where we have access to an online environment, be valuable or not? And we see still in 2020 a lot of debate about that. Recently, also on the Financial Times, there was this article from eminent professor of Copenhagen Business Schools challenging the fact that online teaching is less effective. It's a matter of quality. So if you put little effort to develop online teaching, the result will be very poor. And we, when we design a module for our qualifications, but also smaller modules for Openlearn or for FutureLearn, we put an incredible amount of effort. And people are surprised how you are using actually 2 years to develop a module. Yes, we do, because we need to guarantee that the learning experience is good enough for the students we have. And that's the only way possible, we found. So giving time to people to be creative. On a second problem, we will face many universities that have invested in online education, and they may stay. The problem is will the faculty able to teach both online and offline? We see a lot of blended approaches where students can see a lecture from home, taken from the room. Some of them are suboptimal, so some of them do not pay off the investment, because we have been through that. We have been like ages before them, and we know basically what they look like. If I may, Despina, I pick up a related comment from Kevin that I see in the question. I mean, what we teach is subjects, so we do not tailor fully our teaching towards the context, because our teaching is beyond the time, in the sense that subjects are taught to give a backbone of knowledge that enables people to deal with problems that are contingent. So there can't be a continuous adaptation of the subject. It's like we do not create a new mathematic approach for COVID. We do not create a new business approach for COVID or for digital transformation. The current theories are not contradicted fully by digital transformation. Of course, some of them are debated, but when a theory is contradicted, it gets debated and changes to a new theory. So, and it's a long process that is still has to come.
Thank you, Giacomo. There's more questions coming from the audience for Kate and Jane. So there have been few for Kate. May I go over to Kate and ask her some questions? So, Kate, I can let's say go with the first question first. Do you see any downsides to the move to remote working and a reduction in face-to-face interaction, both as an organization but also in patient-to-doctor interaction?
Yes, of course. Yes, of course. And I don't think we're suggesting that virtual interactions should replace all face-to-face interactions. So from the studies that I've read and from the conversations that I've had, I think it's far more likely that we'll see a move to a hybrid model. Now let's just touch on the patients, because I think it's important. The study that I cited in my earlier discussion with you said that 90% of patients overwhelmingly felt that the virtual treatment had been positive. I think we need to place this in context. It is very likely that they would have had a virtual interaction or nothing, and therefore we have to remember all of these questions that are being asked during a very stressful time where really there is no choice will have that bias on them. What we can't ignore for are the vulnerable patients who maybe are elderly and don't have access to the digital tools that perhaps some of us on this call have, those who may have a disability or learning disability, those for whom perhaps English isn't their first language. So we need to be very sensible about this. You know, we need to accept that a world with no face-to-face interactions, I don't think anybody wants. You know, there's going to be parts of us, there's going to be all of us that misses that interaction to some degree. So I think what we're seeing is a move to a hybrid form of interaction. So yes, I do think there are downsides. And I think that there are variances within different patient groups. We need to be sensible about that. I think if you were asking about farmers' interaction with healthcare professionals, again, I think it's a hybrid model. What you might find is where we've previously had no-see customers, and these are customers that farmers and industry may not have been able to see as regularly as they wanted to because perhaps of geographical issues. They're simply too far away. Then the use of a virtual tool will enable greater frequency of those interactions, or perhaps an interaction where it previously wasn't possible. So I think it's making sure that you take your face-to-face options, your virtual options, and you let the customer lead. So constantly, please think outside in. You know, with all of this, that's the 101 of any business, is what's best for the customer, what's best for the patient.
Thank you, Kate. I have
You're
one
welcome.
more question for you. Is from Paul Dixie from Novartis. How do you think the change in the way that pharma engages with HCPs in digital channels might change how it recruits and develops employees?
Yeah, sure. So hi, Paul. I know Paul from Novartis, so it's lovely to have him on the call. I think it would be very interesting. I think what we'll see is where it wasn't already, I think digital capability will become increasingly essential as standard in the recruitment process. I think it's not just digital capability for digital roles anymore. So that's the first thing I'm starting to see, and I think we will continue to see. The second is in terms of the actual physical structure of day-to-day working. I think pharma can be quite office-based, and for those who look after multiple international markets can be quite travel-heavy. I think what this best part of this year has shown is that actually working remotely can be hugely productive, and possibly the volume of travel may reduce. So I don't know. I don't think any of us really know. We're looking into crystal ball with all of this, and perhaps people will be so delighted to be able to see each other face to face that there'll be a hockey stick of face to face interactions when we move into whatever this new normal will be. But I think we've proven through the work that we've done as an industry, and pharma has also pulled together across the sector in ways never seen before in our race to develop a vaccine, that we've worked in ways that we couldn't have imagined. We've been productive in ways that we couldn't have imagined. That I think there will be an increased volume of home working for those that for whom it fits. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Kate. I think as we are, coming to a close, I'd like to just say to the audience that we will try and reply offline to some of the questions that we couldn't cover. And before we close, please, I'd like to invite you all to share with us any final thoughts. We have 2 minutes left, so any final thoughts? Everyone. So we told Giacomo or Jane?
Do you want me to go first?
Yes, please.
All right. So yeah, my final thought is the challenges that many organizations, especially small scale one, are facing are regarding the possibility to adapt. So some of them really struggle about resources. In those cases, the strategies they can put in place is very different from big organizations. So in those cases, they need to look outside to find a connection with providers of already made solution might be the case. So looking at outsourcing as a possibility to find on the shelf the solutions they don't have from a digital perspective might be the solution for the scaling up.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Giacomo. Jane, any final thoughts, please?
Just to agree with Giacomo, really, and to I guess in terms of transformation, I guess just a reinforcement that putting a lecture online is not really online learning. There's so much more to it than that, and obviously that's something that the OU has a lot of experience in. Yeah, that would be my final thought.
Thank you. And Kate?
Yeah, I think it would just be within pharma. I think that we need to be really embracing of a fail fast culture. So we need to be more experimental. We need to co-create more with our customer base, and we need to co-create more with startups and entrepreneurs to really challenge our thinking.
Thank you, everybody. Well, I'd like to close today's discussion by thanking you all for contributing, and just saying that we are looking forward to seeing you in our next webinar. You can follow us on social media for announcements on future events. Thank you, everybody.